actually one of the easier things that we can build, at least the equations in our equation tool. Equations can get a lot more complex than this, but we are not going to be looking at the super duper fancy equation builds, mostly because that takes place in Discern Expert, and this is not our rules class. So the simple version of equations happens in the equation build tool. You're going to select your calculation procedure, so calculation DTA, and then you can select the test site. So that's your service resource, of course. That means that different equations can be built for different service resources, right? So if you've got like one service resource that does one calculation with oftentimes it's like constants that are different, then another service resource uses a slightly different equation, then we can account for that in different test sites. Otherwise, we just leave it set to all. No sense in getting fancy if we don't have to. All right. Then moving on to the actual defining of the equation. Just like with a lot of the other build that we have seen thus far, we are able to create different equations for different ages, different genders, and different species, or any combination thereof. We also have the ability to define equations for that unknown age indicator we kind of talked about yesterday. So that's that little checkbox. And then you can also define a default equation. That default equation would be just like other defaults that we've talked about. If for some reason it can't calculate the equation with any of the other parameters, then it uses a default. Honestly, unless you are creating some of those age-specific, gender-specific, or species-specific equations, the default doesn't really matter because everybody's going to use the same one anyway. Right? So you're talking about something like like anion gap, real simple, right? Everybody gets the same anion gap calculation. So no need to really worry about, oh, do I need to have like the default in there? Unlikely, because everyone's treated exactly the same. All right, then down there at the bottom is where the equation itself goes. Our equation tool is capable of handling all of your major scientific equations. And I'm pretty sure that one of these slides has, so here it's got the symbols that we use, just basic scientific stuff. You can do all of the major types of calculations that we would need. And many of our calculations are going to involve other results, right? So if I'm calculating, say, an anion gap here, I'm pulling in my sodium result, my potassium result, my chloride result, my CO2 result. So I'm going to be putting in the assays, and then once I have those results entered, it does the actual math. For the equation, to work properly, those assay names need to be 100% exact. So they have to match exactly what we built as the display for that DTA. So if you can put it in there, great. If not, if like, I don't actually remember how to spell tobramycin, well, then you can hit this little procedures button down here, and it will pull up a list of all of your numeric and all of your calculation DTAs. So it'll have like a little selection box up at the top. This is numeric calculation. So if you need to look up the DTA name, then you can just pull it in that way. So you can select it, you can click OK, and then it'll actually just copy paste that in there for you. So it takes a little bit more clicks around, but it is a way of kind of making absolutely 110% certain that we have match those up. So, excuse me, the reason this is going to be important is that when you come over here to this next tab, this Define Components tab, this is where it's going to tell me whether what I typed into my equation is a procedure, meaning another result, or it's a constant value. So if I am trying to pull in my sodium level, potassium level, chloride level, and CO2 level, those should all be procedures. I personally have always been in the habit of coming to the second tab, clicking through each one of these to make sure that it says procedure, because if it doesn't, guess what? Your equation isn't going to work right, because the system is going to be expecting a constant value instead of another result. So if you end up with things that are spelled incorrectly or extra random things, typos in there. So like in my little slide here, see it's got this random S in here. I have no idea why. I'm pretty sure I was thinking of something there, but it didn't actually finish the thought. But this little S, this is not a DTA. This is not a mathematical symbol. And so it's going to treat that S as a constant. Like I'm saying X equals, except here it's S equals. And so that would show up on this next tab and be waiting for me to put in a constant value. So we always want to double check that, because otherwise your equation is going to do some very strange things, and we don't really want strange things. You can watch the strange things on Netflix, but we don't want strange things in our equation tool. And then for each of our procedures, we're going to indicate if it's a required value to do the calculation. If it's optional, then you have to give it a standard value to use anyway. So can I calculate my anion gap, say, without the sodium level? Well, if I don't need the patient's sodium level, what is it going to use instead? Because, of course, setting something to like 0 or an imaginary number isn't going to really work. And then this last part here, the result, cross accessions. This means that my component, one of these components that I've put into the equation, is not going to be found on the necessarily same orderable / same accession as the others. And so I needed to jump that accession boundary potentially and go find the result elsewhere. Just by default configuration, the system assumes that your calculation and your procedures would kind of be all done at the same time, but that's not always the case, right? You're going to have some that are on like a different orderable or done in a previous accession, or there's all sorts of different combinations of things that we run into. And so you would just want to make sure you tell it to cross accessions, what result status that result needs to be in, right? Can it be a performed result, or does it have to be a verified result to do the equation? And then you have your look ahead hours and look back hours. So how far back and forward are we looking for that other result? And then finally, we have the last step, which is testing the equation. The system wants us to make sure that we put it in there right, and we're not going to get some kind of crazy imaginary number. Strangely enough, I haven't had to really deal with imaginary numbers since I graduated from school. They made such a big deal about those imaginary numbers, and I haven't had to touch them once. It's almost like they don't even exist. Oh goodness, my dry sense of humor is running rampant here today. So you'll put in a value for each and every one of those components. And then up on the toolbar, you just hit that little Sigma button, and that will test it, right? So it'll do the math. You'll get this little result, complete with a date stamp down here at the bottom. Now, unfortunately, this tool is a little bit on the older side. And so there is no way for you to, I guess it would be like get a report out of this tool, because I know that folks have told me in years past that there is a CAP requirement about having to test the equation, being able to prove that we've tested it so we know it works. What most sites do is they just grab a screenshot of the of the tool. It says, yes, I tested this, and here's the date and time. And that'll suffice. Never had any issues with that not working. So it's not super duper ideal because the system doesn't keep track of that test that we did, but it works. It'll work. And then, of course, once our equation is tested, we can go ahead and save it. If at any point we update the equation, you are then going to have to retest the equation to be able to save it. The tool is very, very picky about testing, which I think makes sense. So, any questions about equations? Okay, we're going to hop on over to our equation build tool. Let me close out of some of this other stuff that I have here. Don't need all of that. So it's literally just called equation build. And open this up. Password would be helpful. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and select my procedure. Let's give me my anion gap here. Fun fact, if you are unable to find the equation DTA in that list, then it's more than likely those result types. You know, we talked about the define results types thing yesterday. So more than likely, that's what you would want to look for. Right. So find that. We're just going to do all test sites. All right, we do all ages, all genders, all species, so we'll leave that be. And let's see, go down here in my right section. We are going to put in our equation here. So sodium level plus potassium level minus chloride of CO2. Now, again, if at any point you need a helping hand with the DTA names, so the displays there for the DTAs, then what you can do is hit this little procedures button. Result type appear defaults to calculation, but you can just switch this over to numeric. And then you can pull in any of those other DTAs. So just to show you an example here, if I were to put CO2 level instead of just CO2, I go over here to my define components tab. Right? So sodium, procedure, potassium, procedure, chloride, procedure, CO2 level. Oh, that's a constant, right? So that tells me that's not right. That is not the actual name of my DTA. So I go back over here. Now I know that CO2 doesn't have the level at the end of it. Same thing goes if I were to spell out like level instead of LVL. Capitalization, on the other hand, it doesn't care. You can have it all caps, all lowers, doesn't matter. Oh, chat box, come back here. Does spacing matter? Not really. Personally, I like to kind of space out my math signs because I find it easier to read. But part of that is just my nearsightedness and looking at computers all day. But if it's not spaced out, it's fine. Math symbols, however, do matter, and the equation tool knows all about. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Our order of operations. So you can use parentheses to separate different things like we did here. All right, so define components. Double check I got that right. Yep. Everything should automatically default to required, so I don't need to change that, which means the only thing I got to do is test my equations. So I just put in some numbers. And they don't have to be accurate. Of course, the equation tool doesn't know any of that. So I just put some stuff in here. There we go. So I see the little numbers, they're all listed. So I go ahead and perform my calculation. And there we go, I get a result. All right, once I've got that tested, I can go ahead and save it, and I am good to go. CO2 won't let you add a number. You may have to like type it into the box and then like click back onto one of the others. That last one, for some reason, it always is kind of tricky. See, like I had to type it in and then click out, and it's grayed out. Go back and double check on that define components tab. Make sure it's coming up as a procedure. That's weird. So if it's coming up as a constant, then you want to go back and double check your equation, right? Make sure it's CO2, not C02. And if you have to, you can use that procedures button to pull in the name of it. But as long as it's coming up as a procedure here, then I don't know of any reason why it wouldn't let you put a number in there. Ah, yes. I do that a lot too with the CO2. I don't know why. I guess because the O and the 0 are right next to each other on the keyboard. I'll type the C02, which sadly does not work. All right. Any other issues, questions, comments, conundrums?
I have a question.
Sure.
In the Define Components tab, there's a cross accessions.
Yep.
What is that?
That is what allows you to pull in procedures from other orderables potentially done on other sessions at some other point in time. So if your component procedures are somewhere else, so I think we do that sometimes with was it like the creatinine clearance or things like that, where it's kind of a little bit here, a little bit there, then that just tells it to go outside of the current session number to find that information.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions, comments, etc.? Okay. I think this is a great time for us to go ahead and grab our morning break. So we'll take our 15 minutes and then we'll meet back up here for some more fun times. I think next we have interpretation. So, something very exciting to look forward to.
want some towels. You know, cotton ones. Well, these ones are like car towels. Yeah. It's not cotton.
right, welcome back, everybody. Sorry, I couldn't stop coughing. Oh, okay. I think I'm good now. I have my cough drops in case I need them. So hopefully I won't. All right, let me get this timer out of here. And let's see. Interpretations. Ah, yes. One of my favorite subjects. I love talking about the interpretation tool. I'm only being a little tiny bit facetious. I've used the interp tool enough over the years that I've more or less figured out all of its tricks that it tries to play on people. Can't say that I know everything, but pretty darn close. So we are going to take a look here, and I will do my best to pass on as many of those tips and tricks as I possibly can. The main issue that the interp tool has is it's just old. It's one of those tools that since it works, let's put it that way, and it works in a what am I trying to say? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So it's not technically broken, so they've never really seen a reason to fix it. But I would definitely say that it's toward the top of my list of guys. This would be an excellent quick win for you to put into Bedrock. That would be nice. So anyway, so interpretation DTAs. We use these to evaluate different sets of results. So you'll have component DTAs, component procedures, and then we provide an interpretation based on those component procedures. So they can be used to explain a grouping of results, result A, result B, result C, interpretation, or it could just be the only charted result. So if you look in a flow sheet, the provider would not see result A, result B, result C. They would only see the interpretation. Now, we use the component procedures to determine the interp, but there's no reason to actually show those to the providers. So it just kind of depends on the test, which is going to be the better way of doing things. I've seen both ways. Come on, mouse, wake up. Okay, so we're going to walk our way through the interpretation tool here. I'm going to start on the first screen and go from there. So the tool is divided up into just these different screens that we see. We just click next to go through each one. Excuse me. So first thing, this one's pretty easy. Pretty easy. We want to select our activity type. Okay, guess what? It's going to be GenLab. Okay, we got that out of the way. Now, we're going to have two different interpretation modes. We're going to have the interpretation mode of add and the interpretation mode of modify. Now, you may be sitting there thinking, well, that's obvious. If I'm adding an interpretation, I go to add mode. If I'm modifying an interpretation, I go to modify mode. And you would be pretty correct. The only issue is that the tool does not make that decision for you. And so if you do something like you get part of the way through an interpretation, but you don't really have time to finish it, so you're going to log out, you're going to come back, and you're going to work on the next day. And you're like, oh, yeah, I didn't finish that interpretation, so now I got to go and I got to add it in again. No, you don't want to do that. So the interpretation tool will have saved a incomplete version of your interp, and it's still out there in the database. And in general, the resulting tools that we use are not fond of multiple interpretations for the same DTA. It's technically possible at the service resource level, so you could have different interpretation patterns for different service resources. But for the same service resource or at the all level, you don't want to have multiple interpretations. The system is going to get confused, and all you're going to have is error messages. So, want to make sure that we are putting the tool into the right mode. Excuse me. Okay. Then we can select our interpretation detail. That's going to be the actual interpretation DTA, right? So that's the one that we are trying to build. And then you have your order catalog procedure. You want to go ahead and select the order that we're building for. Right, this is going to allow us to pull in the other component procedures that are going to be part of our interp. Service resource. You can build different interpretation patterns for different service resources. So instrument A does one interpretation, instrument B does a different interpretation. You can do that. If you do not have to, don't. I think that's been a recurring theme here. If I do not need to customize something to a specific level, there's no reason to do so. So if you are going to use the same interpretation regardless of the service resource that is being affected, then fine, no biggie. That is something unique to GenLab, by the way. So for those of you guys that do maintain multiple solutions, we do not have that flexibility with the other areas of the lab that do interps. GenLab is the only one where the different interpretation patterns for different service resources actually works. Okay, then we have our interpretation type. While it looks like there are 4 interpretation types there in the list, actually there's only 3, because you, for GenLab, cannot use reference table. Do not use that. Reference table is only used for blood bank, and even then only used for certain situations, certain types of orderable. So if we're building out a GenLab interpretations, you should only be choosing either alpha response, alpha and text, or text only. Okay. Then, if you choose alpha and text or text only, you're going to have that text option, which is just saying, is the text of my interpretation going to be modifiable by the end user or non-modifiable by the end user? What this interpretation type is going to be doing for you is determining what the final outcome is going to be. So is your final interpretation pattern going to be an alpha response? Is it going to be a combination of alpha and some text that we put into the tool? Is it going to be text only, just meaning, text we type into the tool here. So that is what those two things are kind of coming together to do for us here. Moving on, we click next. Oh no, we don't need those little annotations anymore. Goodbye. Okay. Awesome. So now, next screen, we are going to have our component procedures. Component procedures will be any of the other DTAs that are going to be determining our final interpretation. And so you'll have, like in our case, we have just the one urine barbiturate screen, and that is what's determining our final outcome. You could have multiple component procedures. Okay, great. And then sometimes you may run into a situation where there are component procedures that you don't need, right? There may be other DTAs on that orderable that really don't matter for the interpretation, in which case we want to remove those. So there's going to be a little button up here. So I would say, oh, I don't need the second DTA, assuming there was one. I can hit this little red X and poof, it's gone. So that is something that we kind of have to evaluate, because not necessarily every component procedure is going to be in there. These cross time columns, these are what we can use to determine if the component procedure in question comes from somewhere else. So is it part of another orderable somewhere? In which case, we got to cross time, we got to tell it to look back in time, and how far back we want it to look. Okay, result status would be the last one here. That is going to be the performed or verified, unless you are including other DTAs from somewhere else, then it should really just be performed. Right. The only time we're going to include a verified result is if it's part of a previous order. All that means is that the I'm trying to say the result, the interpretation result would not be able to fire until the result was in a verified status, if you chose that one. So performed is usually the preferred option there. Okay, then we move on to one of the more confusing parts of our interpretation build. And it's not actually that confusing. I think the issue is just that there's never been like a really solid explanation for what this screen does. And I think over the years, a lot of people just kind of got frustrated with it. But that's my job to make it make sense. And so the third screen here of the tool is going to have us create what are called hashes. The hashes are going to be used to create groupings of results. It's the whole point of our interpretations is result A plus result B plus result C equals such and such, right? Equals some interpretation. So because we're dealing with potentially numbers and trying to explain a group of numbers. You have alphas trying to explain a group of alphas. If the hashes did not exist, then we would end up with a situation where you are having to build out interpretation patterns for every single possible combination of results. Yeah, that potentially infinite numbers of result combinations. I don't know about you guys, but that does not sound fun. It sounds like an awful lot of work because you're talking about hundreds upon hundreds of different combos, right? So instead, we use the hashes. It allows us to say, okay, these sets of results, these are similar. So we're just going to kind of group those together. These sets of results, well, those similar too. So now we're going to create another grouping. And so it just allows you to basically speed up the interpretation build. So you can see here with my U-bar screen, if I get a result from 0 to 0, well, that's one group. That's a hash of 0. If I get a result anywhere from 1 to 50, okay, that's a different group. That means something different. And then 51 to 100, that's another group. And then 101 to basically infinite, 999, would be my fourth group. Again, it's just meant to make everything a little bit more efficient in what it's doing. The other thing that I think over the years has confused the heck out of people is the hashes themselves. So the hashes, you can see here in this example, are very commonly defined as numbers. So I got a 0, 1, 2, and 3. Those don't mean anything. It's just a designation. So that when I get to my final interpretation patterns, I can say, well, this 0 result means this, 1 result means this, 2 result means this, 3 means this. You could just as easily define that as 0, low, medium, high, and put the actual text in there, and it would still do the exact same thing. So it's just traditionally, over the many, many, many years that Cerner has been a thing, we have the interpretations that have just always been built with these hash numbers. Dates back to kind of the original versions of this tool, where it just didn't work as well if we tried to use the text. They have since updated the tool on the back end, so now it does work a lot better. But the numbers just, they kind of stuck. We never really got around to updating the way we teach folks to use it. So like I said, you can use text there if you want to. And the only thing is, you don't want to put any spaces in there. You don't want to put any characters, like characters other than letters and numbers in there, because the tool does not like those. But anything else is fair game. So it really just comes down to what's going to be the easiest way for us to build out these various different patterns. The end users do not see any of the patterns, so we don't have to worry about them having to interpret any of this, which is good. So you'll set up all of the possible hash combinations like we see here. You do have to account for any possible results, so that's why this goes from like 101 to 999. Just based on whatever the possible results are, you want to have your bases covered, basically. The other thing, especially with numeric DTAs, that I always warn people about, the interp tool does not honor data map, so it's not going to like automatically force you to use decimals if you told it needs decimals. You're going to have to do that yourself, right? You're going to have to say, oh, okay, my ubarb screen has 2 decimals, so those ranges are going to have to be defined with 2 decimals. And that does have to be done manually. And then finally, we come to the patterns, the interpretation patterns themselves. And so this is where we're going to spell out all of the different combinations of the hashes. Right? So I have hash 1, hash 2, hash 3, hash 4. This particular interpretation example that we're using is pretty simple because you just have the one numeric DTA that we're explaining. But when you have the multiple component procedures, you do want to make sure that all of the different combos are being built in here. Anything that would be possible for an end user to enter as a result. So that can lead to a marked increase in the number of patterns, but by using those hashes, we won't have near as many. So here in this example, this is just a text-only interpretation. So I just fill in the text down there at the bottom. You can take this opportunity here in the tool to put in like custom fonts, use something different than Arial size 10. But I would just add a slight word of caution that it may look fine in our build tool, but that doesn't mean that it's going to cross over. Your text formatting may very likely not cross over to other places. So formatting doesn't cross interfaces. It doesn't often cross over into the flow sheets. So when we're talking about reviewing results in PowerChart, so you can, but it's usually kind of superfluous would be a good word. All right, so any questions about interpretations before we go ahead and dive in head first? That's often the easiest way to understand interpretation build, is just to do it. Okay, off we go. The interpretation tool is a standalone tool. So you can actually find it right in the Millennium Applications folder. So come over here, and that one, interpretation tool. I'll log in here, Cerner. Okay, now I'm going to select my activity type, which of course is going to be GenLab. Make this a little bit bigger here. That's better. All right, so GenLab as my activity type. I know that I am building out a new interpretation, so I know that I need to be in add mode, but you can always double check. So if I'm like, I know that Joe was supposed to build this interpretation, but then Joe went on vacation, so I'm really not sure what they did. you can actually switch this over to modify mode, grab the interpretation, and it'll tell you, right? So it'll either pull up something that's already been started, or like in my case, it says no interpretation exists for this detail. So no build has been saved to the database. Go ahead and make sure I'm in add mode here. Select my assay. Move on to the next one. I want to select my order catalog procedure, otherwise known as just my order. So it should be that UBARB screen. Service resource, I'm going to select all.
Hey, Caitlin.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't see mine on the list of interpret detail.
Ah, all right. Well, let's try a couple of things here. So it's probably the interpretation type. That's more than likely what causes that. So let's check here. What DL number / initials are you using?
6.
6. Okay, that would be. That goes the axiom. Okay. 6. Yep. So see, well, it's because you used this one. You didn't use a DL6. So let's
okay.
go up here and next. If we go down here to need L6. No, that's 4. I can't read. Okay, so yeah, it looks like you just used that one, but I don't remember if that would have already been in the system or if you just didn't put your DL6 on it. Let's see. I can't type today. Oops. Stop that. Laboratory. I don't think that it would have previously existed. Gen Lab. Let's see. Interview bar screen. Maybe it did. No, that would be Monday. So it looks like you probably just created it. Yeah, that's the old one. So what we should be able to do here is just put a DL6 at the start of it. Okay. So now we'll just do a quick little cancel out of this. Fix the DTAs there. DL6. Oh, there we go. You'll probably have to close all the way out of the interpretation tool and then open it back up again. But cross our fingers, it should be showing up there now.
All right. Thank you.
Would that also be where you'd want to go if you wanted to edit the name? Would that be the easiest?
Yeah, dork would be where you want to go.
Okay.
If you, it's a weird thing about the way that GenLab, the GenLab order works in Bedrock. Like if you update it in Bedrock, it only updates the the relationship between the assay and the orderable which is strange. It doesn't update the actual DTA table. So if you need to make changes to the assay as a whole, Dork is going to be the better bet there. Anybody else have any issues finding their interpretation? No? Okay. So then what we want to do is, okay, we've got our interpretation, we've got our order, we're going to leave service resource to all. Our interpretation type is going to be text only. And then for the text option, what does our activity say? Good question. Non-modifiable. Okay. So again, that just means that the interpretation, when the end user sees that interpretation in such result entry, they won't be able to change the text. Modifiable, of course, would mean they could change the text. All right, that screen should be done. So we click next. Now we have our component procedure. Now we have it easy because we just have one singular component procedure. If we had extra component procedures, then we would want to make sure that we got rid of those. Right? So hypothetically, let's say I didn't need this one. I could click on the little selector button over on the left-hand side, and then I hit this little red X up here. So that is just another one of those things we kind of have to evaluate what's needed and what isn't. But for ours, we need all of it. We need everything. So we're going to leave that UBarb screen in there. And I'm going to mark this as required. And my result status is going to be performed. And then I can go ahead and click next. So this is the part that the interpretation tool sneaks in that causes the issues where we end up with duplicates of our interpretations, because it says, hey, do you want to save the information on the previous screen? And I'm like, sure, I love to save. Saving is good. But then folks don't connect that with the fact that, yes, once I've saved it, that there is an entry now there in the database. It's not like some of the other tools where it like saves it, but not really, like holds it in the memory. It does actually write it out to the database. So me, I like to save as I go. So that if you have extraneous DTAs on there that shouldn't be there, that is going to be something that for right this moment, yes, you can go ahead and remove it by, again, you select the component procedure with the box on the left-hand side, hit the little red X up there. But later when we are done with this, I would highly recommend you go ahead and double check the associated assays. So go back into that associated assays wizard for the order in question and make sure that that assay didn't accidentally slip in where it wasn't supposed to. But for now, we should be able to build the interpretation as long as you've got the other components in there, the other component, singular, in there. Okay, now it's time for some hashes. We're going to set these up. So first and foremost, we have to start at the top. The top is where we're going to have our various different patient parameters. We have seen these now many times, right? We have species, race, gender, age, that we could be building interpretations based on. If I don't need to, then I'm not going to bother. I'm just going to build everything to something like an all level. Right? So you'll notice that there are two different add new buttons. You got to add new button at the top, add new button at the bottom. This is the other thing that just kind of gets folks rather frustrated because you get the two buttons confused, which it's understandable. They do exactly the same button, right? It's just one controls the top part of the window, the other one controls the bottom part of the window. So up here at the top, I'm going to click that add new button one time, just once. It adds a row. It says we've got all species, all races, all genders, all ages. Great. That's all I need, right? I do not need to customize the interpretation with any of those options. Not for this one anyway. So then, once I have my singular row at the top part of the screen, I am going to go down to the bottom portion of the window. And now I need to add some rows down at the bottom for my hashes. You'll notice that the add new button is grayed out. That is because we have to manually select the row in the top part. I told you this tool is very old, so it's very, very particular about the way things are done. It doesn't make any assumptions whatsoever about what we're trying to do. So I have my row of parameters here. Now I'm going to tell it that I need to add hashes for that row of parameters. And so I click on it and click on the select button over on the left-hand side. Looks like part of the table, but I promise it's just a button. And then down here at the bottom, my add new button should now be available. Now I'm going to add a row. Okay, and I have my first result combination that I need to enter. Well, this first one is going to be from a 0 result to a 0 result, hash 0. So that's strange. I know I typed 0, but it's telling me that that's an invalid character. But I know that I've used zeros before on my hashes. This is another one of those things that has to do with just how old this tool is and how they've not really brought it into the 21st century. What I did is I actually typed the 0 key on the number pad on my keyboard. I have a just standard desktop keyboard that I use. I find it too difficult to type on my laptop keyboard all day. And so when I used that 0 on the number pad, it tells me invalid hash entered. I'm going to get the same exact message if I try and put in like a question mark. Right? So what's happening here is that the tool is seeing the number pad 0 as a completely different character. That's actually how they used to be coded in the long, long ago days. We were talking like 90s, earlier than that. And the interp tool is still kind of living in the past. But only for the 0. If I use a 1 through a 9, it'll work just fine. So if we do want to use 0 as the hash for one of our component procedures, we just have to make sure and use the 0 that is above the letter keys, not the one on the number pad. Now I'm ready for my next row. The next row, I go over and I add a new. And make sure you're using the correct add new button. You don't want extra rows up at the top if you don't need them. This one's going to be from 1 to 50. Oops, that's a 2. 50 hash of 1. And the next row, this one is 51, 2, 300. That's a 2. More, 351. No, 301, sorry. 301, 2, 999. It would be a 3. Give everyone a second to finish putting those in there. Okay, when you are done creating your hashes, you can go ahead and click next. Our last step is going to be to create the interpretation results, what the outcomes of our interp are going to be. We'll see another little save box here. So before I move on, does anybody have any issues, need a little bit more time? Nope, okay, good. So I'm gonna go ahead and save what I've done. Ooh, squeaky chair. Now I just need to have the different combinations here. So I'm going to start with my 0. I mean, it doesn't technically matter what order you put them in. Excuse me. Then, since this is text, I need to go down here to the bottom, and I need to put in the actual text. So find my place here again. First row, #0, results, -4 barbiturates. Now I'm ready to move on to the next one. That one was pretty quick and easy. So excuse me. All right, what we want to do is we want to have another row here, but you'll notice that we are a little bit lacking in the add button. The add button is kind of not found. So what we want to do is we want to actually just hit the enter key. I know, seems kind of simple when you think about it that way, but excuse me, the enter key is going to be your thing there. So I'm going to do that again just to reiterate it. So you go up here to the results column, and then you click into there, you hit enter on the keyboard, and that gives you your next row. So I can select my next hash. This one is low presumptive positive. Okay. Go back up here, click in my result column, hit enter. Next one, my presumptive positive. One more. H3. Non-feasible. Interpretation. Oops. Retesting. Required. And then just hit the finish button when you are done.
Caitlin, can you copy and paste here? Or is that not recommended?
You
Okay.
can. I would just say that if you are copying and pasting like off like a website or something, just look out for any weird formatting that it might cross over. But yeah, copying and pasting is perfectly fine.
Are we going to cover how to add a comment that populates with the result?
That is interpretive data, and yes.
Okay.
Name is similar, but they're not actually related whatsoever. But yes, that is coming down the line. So anybody need a little bit more time to finish up their interpretation? No? Okay. Cool beans. And then I will call this done. And we will move on to our next thing here. And that is going to be our word processing templates. Word processing templates are relatively simple, but still very, very useful functionality. And so we have these kind of predefined sets of text that we can use to speed up like entries of kind of standard comments that we might use, the text-based results that we might have. And so anywhere that we would be just kind of consistently adding the same text over and over and over again. It's a great time to be able to use these. Excuse me. So we're going to be doing this in the word processing templates tool. So the word processing templates tool is going to have us two options here. We're going to have the add, new, and open. So similar to what we see in other tools. The build that we're going to be focusing on is the adding new build. Modifying is just, of course, making changes to the word processing templates that we already have. All right, so adding in a word processing template tool here, or word processing template rather. We start with the name, and we have the description. So the name is going to be a nifty little thing that we can use. And if you think back to the activity that we did on Monday when we were putting in that critical results, we put in CRIT and then hit F9 on the keyboard. That's the name of the word processing template. It's like a short little mnemonic. And so if we want to be able to use that F9 functionality, then we want to make sure that name does not have any spaces in it. So the spaces are going to break that ability to call it in with the keyboard shortcut. It doesn't break the template entirely. You can still search for it manually and use it, but it just makes it a little bit more steps we have to take to do it. So I just recommend you don't put any spacing in the names, but then you can use the description to be a little bit more, well, descriptive in what it's going to do. So let's see, then we have the template type. So there's going to be two options in there. One says template, one says letter. We don't, as far as I'm aware, have any letters for GenLab. So we're really just going to be building the templates. Let's see, activity type. It is not technically necessary for you to select the activity type on a word processing template. However, we do recommend it because it's just going to make it easier for the end users to find it. So if I'm like, gosh, I can't remember what that little short thing was that I was supposed to enter for a critical result, then they can actually hit F2, search for the template, and then have it come up in the results. So it doesn't restrict any use of the word processing template. So I could still use a GenLab word processing template in BloodBank. It just makes it so that it's a bit simpler. And then, oh, the user option. You can build word processing templates for individual users, but you can also jump off a bridge. I wouldn't recommend that either. Really, no, it's not a good idea. So building word processing templates to individual users is an absolute maintenance nightmare, because once you start customizing build for individual people, that is not an easy thing to put back in the box. Everybody wants to be special. Everybody wants to have their own customized build, and it's terrible. There's no other word for it. So that is not a feature that I would advertise, and we'll just stick with these standard word processing templates that we'll be building for everybody. And so really, really, really would not recommend that user build choice. And then we have the organization. So occasionally we might have certain word processing templates that are only going to be used at individual organizations, individual facilities. If that's the case, then you can select individual orgs, and that will make it so that the users will only be able to utilize those word processing templates at that facility. In general, I wouldn't really recommend this either. Again, just because it's a huge pain in the rump when it comes to trying to maintain them, and it's looking at like the organizations that the user, the medtech in most cases, is associated to. And I don't remember, I think it matches that up to, I think it's the patient's location. Let me double check that. Now I'm getting things confused. Hang on. I don't want to be giving you incorrect information here. I hate this two-factor thingy. Now, where did I lose my information for word processing templates? I think the issue is that it's a shared tool. Let's try here. Let's see, templates defined by activity type. Do not assign the templates to a username. Yep, good recommendation there. Let's say anything about the organizations here. I'm gonna have to do some digging. I don't know where I've lost that, but I want to make sure what it is that it's validating that location based on. I can't remember if it's based on the patient's location or if it's based on the user's location. Neither of those would make a whole lot of sense. So I'll double check. I'll keep looking over lunch and I will report back. Anyway, let's go back over here and we'll put a pin in that and I'll come back around to it. But we can still go ahead and build out our word processing template because we're not going to be building ours to a specific location anyway. But there's one other thing that I want to mention about this box, because it does actually work a bit contrary to what most of our other tools would do. And so, in almost every other application that we've seen thus far, if I select all, it means select all current and future, in this case, organizations. So setting something to all facilities means all of my currently existing facilities and any facilities that I may add in the future. This tool does not do that. If you select all organizations here, it is only selecting the organizations that are in this box, and the only ones that you can see. So it is not going to be kind of proactively selecting any future organizations that we may add. And so that makes it even more tricky when it comes to selecting the organizations. The other thing that I've found, rather by accident, is that list of orgs that is populated there is based on actually the organizations that you being the person logging into the tool, your username is associated to an HNA user. So if your login has been restricted based on locations, then this tool will also be restricted based on locations, which I always thought was kind of odd because it's a build tool, but that's the way they chose to do it. So I don't know. So I guess the short version of all of this is, if you don't need to set specific word processing templates at specific organizations, it is more trouble than it's worth. So we'll move on here. This is the easy part. We're actually defining the word processing template itself. And so you would come in here, you put in the text of the template. You can technically put anything in here. I would strongly advise against things like using like super duper fancy like ASCII tables and trying to use like your pipes and your underscores to make something look like a table of information, mainly because pipes do not play well with HL7 messages and anything going across an interface. It's going to mess that up. All right, so other things though, it would be fine. Same thing I kind of mentioned with the interp tool. Just because it looks pretty in this tool doesn't mean that that formatting is going to cross over into other tools. So again, places like PowerChart coming off of the clinical event table, the clinical event table doesn't read a lot of the formatting that we can build in other tools. It just is going to see the text of the result. Most formatting does not cross over interfaces. So while there's a lot of things that you could do, it may not end up working the way you ultimately expect that it would be the short version there. So I would say probably stick to the basics, putting some text in here, maybe adjusting the font if we really want to, but that's probably about it. You can use underscores to act as the fill in the blank spots. And so if we want to have something like this where we're prompting for them to enter something, here I'm saying, okay, I've called the critical result to person and I put in a name at a particular date and time, and then by whoever. So that is one way. You can also make these word processing templates just plain text, like they don't have to change anything. It's just a block of text that they're putting in there. I have seen a number of various versions of word processing templates built as just like standard little disclaimers or blurbs or, hey, this result was performed at such and such reference lab. And there you go. That's just providing a little bit of extra information without actually, doing anything super fancy. So there's really not any one set in stone way that we have to use word processing templates. They are pretty flexible. As long as it's a text-based DTA or comment. So any questions before we go ahead and do some build real fast? Okay. To the word processing templates tool, and then we get to go to lunch. Word processing templates. Nice little standalone tool here. Oh, it automatically minimized my tool. That wasn't very nice. All right, I'm going to create a new word processing template. A little white piece of paper button there. And then this one, we're just going to mimic a version of that critical template. So I'm going to call it my DL number or initials and CRIT. Remember, if we want to use that shortcut key, that F9, don't put any spaces in the name. Okay, description, I'll just do something like critical results, template type, template, activity type, general lab. And then I don't need to do anything with user, and I don't need to do anything with the organizations. We're going to leave those alone. And so I click OK. And then I can put in my template text. This would be another place if you need to do some copy and paste. Go right ahead. I would say that nothing comes to mind just off the top of my head of tools where you just flat out can't copy paste unless you just, you try Control C, Control V, and it just does not work. I think there's a couple of those, but most of these, like I'm putting in a block of text tools, they'll allow you to paste from somewhere else. The only potential thing that we run into is occasionally there'll be like formatting issues. Because, you guys can see this is a pretty basic setup. You got your fonts, you got your bolds, your italics, your underlines, but you don't have all of the massive amount of choices that we see in Word. So sometimes, especially if it's coming off a web page, I've found if you try and paste it into one of these tools, sometimes the formatting will do some funky stuff. But other than that, I mean, it's not stopping you from copying and pasting. It's just being kind of weird. Equations tool. Yeah. The only I tried to copy and paste in there, and it doesn't work or it's I don't remember. Must be getting close to lunchtime because my brain is fried. Need to refuel. But yeah, short version is you can copy and paste in here. Just watch out for weird spacing and things like that. A lot of websites have like text formatting that you don't even see. It's like hidden behind the scenes, and it'll pop up when you copy and paste into things like this. So, if I wanted to, I could come over here, do a little Control C, do a little Control V. Ta-da! So it does look a little bit different. So it changed my font. It's now 11 instead of 10. But that's just because I copied and pasted it out of the participant guide. Today I learned our participant guides are apparently an Arial size 11. Weird. And so once I have that in there, I can go ahead and save my word processing template. They can be as simple or as complex as we need them to be. And we use these for GenLab quite a bit. We use them occasionally for Blood Bank. We use a bunch of them for AP. I don't honestly remember if Micro uses word processing templates. We have like coded responses for Micro. They might in limited ways. I can't remember any off the top of my head. So it's mainly just those other three: Blood Bank, GenLab, and AP. They use a lot of them. Alrighty. Any questions about word processing templates? Anything to do here? Nope. Then I think it's time for us to go ahead and go to lunch. I'm ready. So I will see you guys back here at 1 p.m. Central Time. And we'll be moving on to something else. Have a wonderful lunch break, and I'll talk to you in a bit.